Hi, I'm Greg Farrar, coming to you live from the snowy state of Colorado. Snow's on the ground and COVID's in the air, but not as much as it used to be, as we will soon see. But let's start with the countries, then we'll go to the states of the United States, and then we'll go to the counties of California. 3 segments, roughly 20 minutes each. All right. News is relatively good, I'm always happy to say. It's been a while since I've really been able to have good news, though last time was pretty good too. I think that the broad theme here is going to be things are dropping, but there's a little sense we may be hitting a bottom in growth rates at least, and that's too bad because it needs to drop a lot longer before we're really out of the woods here. Let's start with severity at the country level. Severity, my own special metric, daily cases per million, combined with weekly growth ratio as a way to show that in a single graph how bad things are. Things are bad if you have a lot of cases. Things are also bad if your growth rate is very high. Things are extra bad if it's both, like we saw here for Ireland a while ago, but not anymore. Look at Ireland now. Where is Ireland in this list? There it is. Ireland is at 400 after being up to 6,000 in severity. It was blowing everyone away. Now it's down into really once upon a time I would have said 400 was very bad, but relative to how things have been lately, relative to the graph we see of all the other hardest hit countries, 400 it puts you in the bottom of the top 20, I guess. Nevertheless, there are some countries that are considerably better. Even in this top 20, this is the worst ones, the most severe countries. We've got Slovakia, we've got Lithuania, we've got Peru and Tunisia, France and Latvia, Estonia. We're still getting this sense of, there's a lot of Europe in here, Eastern and Western Europe, still well represented in the most severe lines here. And of course, we've got the United States, which I'll just take a quick, well, first of all, from the top. Portugal at 1,600 is really, really terrible. 200 is a hot spot, a severity hot spot. Spain, also pretty bad at 1,400. Actually, the worst thing about Portugal is it's not even dropping. It's holding steady at 1,600. A lot of these other really bad ones, like, for instance, as we saw, Ireland, are dropping quickly. Spain heading slightly downward. Israel dropping quickly down to 1,000. Lebanon. All of these are hot spots for sure. Well into the 3 digits or 4 digits. Officially hot spots by my own official ratings. But then there's the cluster down here of all the ones in the 200 to 600 range. These are pretty bad. We really want to see these, well, 0, but anything under 200 we could at least start to breathe. But here in Panama, you don't get to breathe because we're still at 400. 400, I've started to think might almost be a place where we could say it's not too bad, but really that's just because I've become so accustomed to these ridiculous numbers over the past few months that 400 seems good. Back in the middle of last year, I would have said 400 is very bad. So there's the list of worst countries. Let's break it down, though. Countries by... Actually, let's take a quick tour to see how is the world doing as a whole, because I like this graph for a change. This graph doesn't go very far back in time, so we can't see how it has been, but this actually shows every single data point, this particular type of graph. I haven't been using this type of graph lately, but this is the growth rate of the world. If it's at 0, same number of cases day over day. If it's above 0, more and more cases every day. If it's below 0, which I'm proud to say it now is, we're seeing fewer and fewer cases every day. And the world, especially since early January, is just looking very good in its growth rates. It's now shrinking at 1% a day. That adds up. 1% a day shrinking. By the way, put anything in chat. I was pretty happy last time to see people asking for specific regions in chat. I end up just talking about whatever's top or whatever's interesting to me if I don't get chat. And since there are very few live listeners of this, you special precious few do get to have my ear very much if you want to look at a particular country or state or region. And by the way, if you're listening to this after live time, You can drop a message on the YouTube video. I do get those and do read them all. And so ask for something and you'll get it next time. Anyway, it's been the longest time that the world has just been hovering right around zero, not getting better, not getting worse, but now it's definitely getting better, at least in the medium term, definitely getting better. Now, interesting to note, there's just the slightest bit of a hook upwards here. Like if this had continued, we'd maybe be down at -3% here, not happening in the last couple days. That's not enough to call a trend, but this is going to be a theme through today's live stream. We're seeing a loss of momentum in the recovery. The recovery's been really strong, and it's not as strong now. And indeed, there's a sense that we may be heading back upwards. Not quite yet in terms of cases, because cases are still dropping, but maybe we're heading back upwards in growth rates. And if that continues, if this little 3-day trend upwards continues, we could be back at zero in just a few days, and then we'd start to see cases rise again. Hopefully it's just a glitch. 3 days isn't really enough to say anything about it yet, but we're going to see this a lot of curves that go downward and then just go upwards just a little bit at the end. So that's the world. The world is unusually good compared to the past many months. The world has always been rising in cases, or at least holding steady, and now it's falling. Okay. Do we want to look at this? No, let's look at this as a somewhat more prettier version where we don't have every last state or country in the world. If we look at the growth, one of the components of daily cases, or of severity, the growth graph is pretty good here, of the 20 worst at least. The 20 hottest in cases, the countries with the most cases adjusted for population, are these 20. We'll see, I'm kind of doing this out of my usual order by going straight to growth, but we'll see next which countries actually do have the number of the hottest cases and what those cases graphs look like. But these 20 are the top ones in daily cases per million. In almost all of these, in fact, no, not every single one of them, but almost 18 or 19 out of 20 are clearly trending downwards. We're seeing the growth rates drop, and indeed, about half of them are shrinking in cases, which is to say they're below zero in their weekly growth rate. For instance, here's Estonia and Latvia, just slightly below zero, 5 or 6%, but that's all it takes. If they can hold that, they will eventually have no cases. Any region that can hold its position below zero will eventually have no cases. It's great to be down in the -30 range. That's about as much as we ever really see. We never see 80%, or seldom see an 80% drop day over day. There's some way that I think the mechanics of the disease, or probably of any disease, just continue to spread always a little bit. There's going to be some transmission, and so you're just never going to see it drop instantly to zero. But when we see 30, when we see 20% drop in weekly cases, that's a very nice trajectory. And we're seeing that even among the hard-hit ones, like Ireland, as we saw, had a phenomenal growth rate for a while, phenomenally bad, and now it's down to -30%, the best of the top 20. Sweden, Panama, Lithuania, all of these dropping very quickly. The United States, also dropping. This is great to see after all this time above zero, and the miserable November we had, and pretty bad December as well, and even this growth that we saw after the holidays in January. All of that seems to be fading away for the moment, because now as we've seen for several of these episodes, it's dropped, and here it is with no clear sign, actually, in this case, in spite of what I said earlier, no clear sign that it's losing its momentum. Again, this appears to have been the United States recovering. I'm calling this for each of these mountains, this is the slope of fear here, the right side. The eastern slope of a mountain is the slope of fear. That is when the epidemic starts to drop away because people cower in their basements, as they should, when you have this kind of a growth rate or the number of cases. So the slope of fear here was overcome then by, I don't know what to call this one, the slope of imprudence, where people go and say, everything's great. We don't have very many cases, much of a growth anymore. We're all going to go hang out for Thanksgiving. And then you have the slope of imprudence. Is that a word? I keep thinking impudence, but that's not the same word at all. Imprudence, I think, is a word. I'm going to say it is anyway. To not be prudent in your social behavior is what causes this rise. And then the slope of fear after they see what happened, and then the slope of imprudence, the west slope of this mountain in the winter holidays. And now again, we're dropping away primarily, I think, under the motivation of what I like to call fear, which is to say everybody is staying away from everyone else. I was actually just listening to and they're staying away because they see what's happening. It's especially in California. Things are really bad. And so people started just staying home for a little bit. They don't want to get the disease. And everyone else seems to be getting the disease. And so anyone they meet might have the disease. And a third or a sixth or something of people in Los Angeles have had the disease. And so you just don't leave your house if you want to be super safe. And then we see cases drop when that happens. I was listening to a book, because that's how I consume books, about pandemics, called The Pandemic Century. And it was talking about Ebola, for instance. And Ebola, this is very much what happened, even though there was a way that they could never quite convince the populace that they were actually trying to help them. The people, all these people coming in from other countries to try to solve the Ebola pandemic against sort of the wishes of the populace. Populace didn't care for it all. Populace thought maybe they were spreading Ebola, lots of rumors flying, as we see here to some degree. But eventually, when enough people started dying, the World Health Organization wasn't the thing that saved them, really. It was that people stopped touching each other. And people stopped touching each other in Africa because they got afraid, because they, at some point, at the cultural level, not being imposed on them from above, but just among themselves, they said, maybe we shouldn't be touching the corpses of the dead, as was the custom. Maybe we should change some of our habits and customs. And that, I think, is what's happening here as well. And that's when Ebola started to recede. And I don't know how much government intervention has helped here, but it probably has helped some. But what probably has really helped is people changing their habits. So if you want to keep this continue, if you want this to continue whatever you're doing, keep doing that. Don't change your habits, because it's when you change your habits and say, oh, look, we've got a 20% and 10%, 12% drop in growth rate across the whole country. Now I can go hang out with my friends. Not recommended. Not recommended at this point to hang out with people indoors unless you want to see this again. Everyone makes their own decisions. If you want social contact more than that, than the downward slope of the disease, everyone can choose that. But for me, I'm choosing this slope. I'm still, even though things are great, cowering in my basement, and hope to do that, expect to do that, plan to do that for at least a few more weeks. If this keeps up, then things might change. And behavior can finally change. But hopefully we hold the pose for a while longer, because that's what gets us there. You can see this maybe starting to bend a little bit now. Now, it's also true that we don't usually see extended periods way below zero. They kind of, at best, it tends to cycle below zero, and that's probably as people relax a little bit. And as long as we stay below zero, that's cool. All right, enough soapboxing. I'm getting away from the data analysis. So, anyway, the good part of this graph is worldwide, across the hardest hit countries, we're seeing these lines dropping, and indeed, in many cases, they have dropped below zero. But not, for instance, Israel. Israel's still growing. It's still growing. The graph's been dropping and dropping. It used to be up at 50%, which is terrible, but now it's down to 4%, which is not even a warm spot when it comes to weekly growth rate. And same with Lebanon, Brazil, and France, and all of these are dropping. And indeed, UAE and Portugal and Spain, all of the hardest hit countries are seeing their growth rates drop. So good. Another factor in this, of course, is immunization. There's some degree to which this downward turn is caused by immunization, but given the relatively low numbers, 5% of the population has had one shot, maybe 4% in the United States, and in many places not even that much, in some places more. But given the relatively low rate so far of immunization, that is probably not a major factor in this curve. The major factor in this curve is fear. All right, so let's move on to the states of the United States. All right, Wyoming had such a, I don't even believe it. I'm just going to skip that. That was probably, and this data is from Corona Data Scraper still. I've been gradually migrating over from there to, actually, I'm not even going to show this graph because I just don't trust Corona Data Scraper anymore. They're wrong in many of their most recent days of data. I did switch over the counties, I think. Let me just pop over to the counties real quick. Yeah, the counties severity graph uses New York Times data now. I really need to switch this over because, Corona Data Scraper is just, it's lost its momentum in tracking the data. So let's just go straight to the components of the severity. You can roughly guess what severity is if from these two graphs I'll be showing. If you have a lot of cases, you have high severity. If you have a high growth, you have high severity. And if you have both, you have really high severity. And by the way, I did the website now. You can do all this yourself on gregfarrar.us if you want to see these graphs or any of these graphs. You can see it there. And I don't spend much of my time maintaining this website, which is why, for instance, we saw that there's the out-of-date data source for severity. But I think it was just this morning, finally get rid of coronadatascraper.com graph of this form. All we have now is the New York Times data for this graph. So this graph can be trusted, I think, as much as I can trust any of these data. There's always some problems in data, but this is a more trustworthy graph than the old one. And what does it show us? Well, here are the worst states in daily cases per million. Adjusted by population, daily cases per million can be used to compare regions. It can compare states of different sizes. It can compare countries to counties or counties to states. It's a nice metric. We like to see this metric be under 200. So before you run out and start kissing strangers on the street, just remember the worst states, 20 states in the United States are above 500. And that's bad. 200 is also kind of bad, but when you get below 200, you can at least start to think about relaxing a little bit. But we still have a very high, strong, a multi-state pandemic happening in the United States. It was back in these days, some of the states, back in September, most of the states were okay, at least most of these states were okay. Really, not many states are okay right now. When I talk about good news, it's good news for the future, not for the present. The trends are good, but even here, it's not totally obvious that the trends are good. Looking at this graph, like let's look at Rhode Island, for instance. Poor Rhode Island just can't catch a break. It was the worst at the beginning, and it had another peak, and now it's back up to 1,000 and seems to be shooting upwards again. Rhode Island, not so good. But a more typical graph is something like Arizona. Arizona had it really bad and still is it's the worst one, but it's dropped by 40% in cases each day, from 1,400 to 1,000. Or South Carolina. Similarly, there's a little bit of a sense that it's dropping. Pretty bad, but dropping. Georgia, bad, but dropping. 700 is nothing to cheer about. But the drop from 950 to 700, that's something to cheer about. North Carolina, similar. Texas, one of the worst right now. Texas up to 800, it's dropped to almost 600. There's just this beginning of a curl upwards, though, that makes you wonder, is Texas really going to recover or is it going to go back up again? Too soon to say. New York, poor New York. At least New York has a solid, clear downward linear trend. But it was at 800. It had done so well for so long back in 30. It held 30 for so long. And then it lost it when everyone else did. But it's down at least to 600. Let's look at all the states just so I can focus on some of my favorites. This would be a great time to jump in and talk, but not too many people watching this video right now. Most of my viewers do watch it later. California, it was much worse. It's heading downward. Just the barest little tip that maybe it's reconsidering its sharp drop. But for now, good news. California down from 11 to 650. However, to reiterate over and over, reiterate, 600 is bad. 600 is dangerous. It is dangerous to go outside and hang out with people in California right now. And it will be until this gets down to at least 200. Colorado, where I am right now, I am pleased to say, is actually looking like it might get in the next weeks, I wouldn't say safe, but into the realm where we can actually start to make behavioral changes without freaking out too much. Not to say that you shouldn't wear a mask, not to say that you should hang out with people indoors, especially unmasked, not to say that you shouldn't limit your social interactions as a whole, but at some point there comes a time where you can say, all right, the most draconian measures we've taken can be relaxed now because we recognize there are downsides to these measures. And I feel like Colorado it's not there yet, actually. I would say it should get to 200 or 100 before things really start to change. But it looks like one of the best. Georgia, pretty bad, but dropping. As usual, I'm just pretty much focusing on places where I know that viewers or my family has people. Michigan got very bad. It is even better at almost down to 200. It's still barely a hot spot, but we're almost getting to the point where I can start saying state X or region Y is no longer a daily cases per million hotspot. But Michigan still is, just barely. Did I already do Texas? I think I did. Texas is certainly a hot spot, very, very hot at 650, but again, looking like it's dropping a little bit. Louisiana has also seen a dramatic, I would say, drop from 800 down to 450. Still a hot spot. Not as hot as some, but still very much a hot spot. Still a dangerous place to be. And I feel like I'm missing at least one of my usuals, but I don't remember them all. Let's move on to the growth rates. This always the loveliest graph of all, and just in the way that the states are moving in lockstep. It's so clear from this graph what's been happening and what's happening. We had the eastern slope of fear that got us down to December 2nd or so, got us mostly below zero, and then Thanksgiving with the slope of imprudence. The eastern slope of fear after that got us down to late December, and the western slope of imprudence got us back up to something really terrible, 40%, 30% growth rate. The eastern slope of fear now again has come online in a big way, and we have almost every state. This is all the states. They're almost all shrinking. Just a few. Virginia's the worst at 6% weekly growth. No one else really above zero. I mean, barely. But just every state shrinking. On average, about 20% every week they're shrinking. That is good. If we can hold that, we are in business. We will get out of this and quickly. Sadly, there's a real sense that, zooming in on the particular slope, that certainly at least it's plateaued down there at 20%, but worse, there's a sense that some of these are headed upwards. Quite a few. Let's look at California. Now, California is not one of the ones headed upwards. California maybe is showing a little bit of a loss of momentum, but just barely. Right now, it's shrinking at 30% a week, which is great, and it's still the growth rate is still heading downward. We don't usually see much more than a 30% growth rate, as I mentioned earlier. So it's normal to level out at 30%, but what I don't want to see is it rising again. Colorado, more typical, this is what we're seeing more typically. It got down to 30 a little bit, and now it's shrinking only at 25% a week. Now, it can shrink at 25% a week for a few months, and we'll be great. We'll be golden. The concern is if this trend accelerates, we might see Colorado head back into growth. I don't know why this is happening. This is not due to, it could just be people relaxing, but I don't think so. The news is pretty dire still, and so I don't know that maybe people have just lost their will to avoid each other. So maybe this could be the beginning of the western slope of imprudence, of a new mountain. More concerning, this could be the onset of the only other reason that I know, which is the onset of new variants, new versions of the SARS-CoV-2 virus have been detected all over the place. There's one from UK area, there's one from Brazil, there's one from California, and I've lost track of them. These variants spread more quickly. They do generally seem to be susceptible to the vaccine, so there's a race here about whether the vaccine comes online fast enough or whether the new variants spread fast enough. So we may be in for a spot of trouble. So far, just the barest hint of it, but that is not the curve we really like to see. Let's look at a few other places. Georgia shrinking, plateauing. Not too bad, not shrinking as fast as some. So it'd be nice to see that faster, but we take what we can get. Texas shrinking, probably plateauing. Ohio shrinking, maybe plateauing. Mostly, though, this is good. This is good what we're seeing here. We're seeing big numbers of negative growth rates. If nothing else, this is going to give our healthcare workers a break let's see, when did this really start? January 20th. So it wouldn't have really happened yet, but in the next week, we should see some clear signs of hospitalizations dropping, because the cases are dropping and have been dropping. In some cases, like in Colorado, they've been dropping for a month. No, not a month. This is 10 days. I got my scale wrong. A couple of weeks, though. And so in Colorado, we should already be seeing hospitalizations dropping. So at least we can take a breather. If there really is a sense that it's going to accelerate, it's possible that some of the things that are being done at the government level may actually help us also overcome this, or maybe help us cope with it if we do get a new western slope of imprudence, or maybe it's the western slope of new variants as the new variants of the virus come online. Anyway, I don't want to paint too dire a picture here, because this is good. This is all very good. But the thing that isn't good, as we just saw, is the number of cases that we're still seeing every day. This is just the growth rate in cases, but it's going to take a long time at 20% shrinkage to get down to 200 or 100 or 50 or whatever we'd really like these we'd like them to have in daily cases per million. It's a long slog towards that, and if these things turn upwards and cross zero again in a week, we're not going anywhere. We're just going to keep with having our spaghetti strands up there in the 500, 1,000 range, and it's still going to be too dangerous to do anything much differently until months from now, when inevitably, I think, the vaccinations finally drive this curve down and keep it down. Though I have to say, if one of these new variants arises that is enough different, the vaccines won't help, and we could have ourselves a whole new pandemic. So we're never out of the woods with this stuff. And by the way, I saw a headline that said it's going to be with us forever. COVID will be with us forever. And I think that's true, but I think people freak out too much when they hear that. So just a little bit of a paragraph from my own understanding of all this. H1N1, for instance, one of the flus. I think it was H1N1. I might have it wrong. It was a pandemic, or not a pandemic, but it was an epidemic that really was pretty terrible, and especially the 1918 variant of the flu virus, which I forget which one that one was by number, but whatever that one was, let's talk about that one rather than giving it a number, because I don't know my numbers. But the 1918 flu pandemic killed millions of people. It was terrible, and then people got immune to it, and it just became another seasonal flu. Coronavirus, and so it's, I think, still around. It's still around, but people get it early when it doesn't tend to hurt them as much, and people are immune to it. And we keep working on vaccines for the flu. We have the flu shot, but it doesn't cover everything. But I do believe we have a vaccine to that one for those years when it's prevalent. Similarly, we do have coronaviruses that have been around for decades. The ones that occur in humans, we call them the common cold in some cases. It's not the only thing that causes the common cold, but those people tend to get them early when they're very young children, and they're mild, and you get the sniffles, and maybe you miss school for a day, and then you're back and you're pretty much immune for the rest of your life. That's probably what's going to happen with COVID. It just won't have the dire effects that it has now in the future, because people will get it when they're young, and maybe we'll just all be vaccinated too, but to whatever degree that doesn't happen. As we've seen, COVID does not hurt kids very much. Kids get a very mild case, no symptoms at all, and then they're immune for a while, and maybe they get it again. But it happens early, and they build up an immunity, and by the time they're 70, where it would really be devastating to them, the immunity is established. And so don't worry about it when you see something that says COVID-19 is going to be with us forever. Yes, it is, but it doesn't mean we're going to have to wear masks against it forever any more than we wear masks against the existing coronaviruses. We will just see it at a low grade in the population. Maybe someday we'll stamp it out entirely. I'm sure we'll try, but even if we don't, it's a cold. It's actually a cold. The problem here is that we have no immunity to this cold, and so it's really wrecking people when they get it late in life. Similarly to how if you don't get chickenpox early enough and you don't get vaccinated against it, then later in life, if you get chickenpox, it's a much bigger problem. It's shingles. It's very problematic. So just wanted to drop that in there. We're never going to get over COVID, probably, but it will cease to be a problem, I think, in the coming year. It'll cease to be a serious problem. It's not even going to be as bad as the flu. The flu is a serious problem. It kills tens of thousands, I think, of people every year. It's a serious problem, and one day we'll stamp that out too, probably through some technological innovation. But for now, COVID is terrible because it's new, and it won't be new forever, and we'll vaccinate it against it, and it will go away. And when in 2025, if someone says, I have COVID-19, it'll be like, oh, no problem. Because they'll be 5 years old. All right. I think that's about enough for the states. Did I miss any of my favorite places? Got no requests this time. Let's just look at New York, just because it has been such a big deal. Often New York also not recovering quite as quickly as others, and it does have a lot of cases. So New York has a real problem right now, but the problem is shrinking. And that's great to be able to say, because for months I've had to say, it's rising, cases are rising, growth rates are rising. And we haven't really had this moment where we can breathe for a minute and wait for the wave to recede. But that's where we are right now. We're watching the wave recede. Unless these turn upwards, we're done. Okay, let's take one more look at California, because we're about to go into the California section. So California, again, is looking great in total cases, daily cases per million. We'll look back there again for just a minute. Daily cases per million for California, not so great. It's at 600, 650. That's bad, but look at that sharp drop that's gotten us to here. If it continues like that for just another week, I'd say 2 weeks maybe, we'll actually be in the clear. It probably won't continue like this for another 2 weeks. We don't usually see that sharp a drop, and you can even see the beginnings of a hook on it. But even if it does this in reverse, which is more typically what we see, where the growth decelerates but still drops, then we could see that 200 line in a month or so. When did it cross it before? It took it from November 14th to, so about 6 weeks from when it became a hot spot until it got to around its peak. And so 2 weeks from there would take us to maybe February 15th, where we might expect it to drop below 200 and cease to be a hot spot. Okay, let's go on into California. So here I actually can look at severity because by request, I was asked to, someone said, what's up with, which was it? San Mateo, I think, was just all wrong on this graph. And so I switched it over New York Times data, and now the severity is based on better data. Not most of the counties were always fine, but there were a few that were just not good. If we zoom in on this, the graph looks, at least from a distance, pretty good. It was higher, it's trending lower, even these worst counties. Actually, let's just look at all the counties. There are few enough of them. And I do throw out the very smallest counties because they tend to they fluctuate too wildly. It gets confusing. I have data on the smallest counties if you really want to know, but anything over, is it 50,000, 5,000? There's a population cutoff where I just don't even track them on these graphs if they're too small. But of the many, 30, 40 that I track, we still see this trend where, broadly speaking, it was higher. It was maybe an average of 1,500 in mid-January as the daily cases per million. 1,500 is terrible. It takes 200 to make something a hotspot. And back then, nobody was below 200. Even the very best, back when Humboldt was at 245, was still a hotspot. Every single one of these 20 counties, no, this is actually all the counties, every single county was a hotspot. And they were up in the 1,500, 2,000, sometimes even 2,500 range. Now look at us. We have nobody over 1,000. Maybe? No, nobody over 1,000. I mean, 1,000 is bad. It's bad. Dangerous. Bad. But it's a lot better than it was when we had 2,500. So the worst counties right now are Riverside, which, though it was up at almost 2,000, pushing 2,000, 1,500 at least, is now down below 1,000. So it's gotten a lot better, but it's still very hot in Riverside. Similarly, Lake, which recently was at 2,100, has now dropped to below 1,000. Kings, which never seems to quite get over it, probably because of the prison, which once was above 2,000, has dropped to well below 2,000 to 800. So these are all very, very hot, but they're all much better than they used to be. If we zoom in a little further at the ones that are even better, we see one concerning graph here, which is Merced, which seems to be rapidly rising and at 700. So that's not good. Ventura, Madera, Napa, here's another one rising, Sutter, Tulare somewhat, San Bernardino. All of these are high but falling. In fact, all of these are high but falling. But let's look at the few really good spots we've got here. Shasta County is not even a warm spot. It's been a long time since we could say that there was someone who wasn't even a warm spot. Warm spot is 100. Shasta at 80 and falling. That's great. And this is where I start to say, don't relax. Don't stop wearing your masks. But maybe we can open restaurants for outdoor dining. The state of California is already obviously making these decisions. They're seeing that there are places that really can start beginning to at least take economic factors into account over the health factors. And this is clearly a county where they could start to say, we don't need to be closing kind of anything at this point. And especially schools. Very latest news from the CDC. CDC says open the schools with proper precautions. We finally have the science on that. This has been a long argued question of whether it's safe to open schools or not, but the science seems to be in. And I would have said not safe, but the science says yes, safe. And so let's open the schools. The CDC's on board, I'm on board. The studies are in. But not without masks, not without social distancing. Let's not have too many wrestling matches because those make super spreader events, as we've found. Sorry, those of you who are married to wrestling coaches. But the wrestling seems to be the worst of all right now. cross-country skiing. Let's just all do cross-country skiing for a little bit. But anyway, the trend here is good. Oh, let's look at a few more. Let's get a little more good news. Imperial, part of the royal couple of kings and Imperial, always goes up and down crazily, probably because of the way people come over the border from Mexico, and Mexico is bad for healthcare. But yeah, Imperial is looking quite good. It's not a hot spot, and it's dropping quickly. San Francisco, yay. Never really got bad. Let's just take a moment to look at San Francisco, because this kind of amazes me. San Francisco, while everyone else is doing thousands, was doing hundreds. I mean, it wasn't great when it was back at 600, but San Francisco, though it's fluctuated, it was almost dropped out of hotspot territory while everyone else was terrible, and now it has dropped out of hotspot territory. Here's San Francisco at 145. So, good news. Good news for one of the major population centers. We'll look at San Mateo, because somebody was asking me about that the other day, and we'll look at San Diego. San Diego used to be really, really bad at 1800. I don't have enough superlatives to talk about how bad things were in some of the counties of California. We'll just call it extra super bad. And now it's down to 400. This is bad. We'll just say this is little b bad. Actually, 200 is little b bad. This is capital B, italicized bad, San Diego right now. But it has been dropping. There's a little bit of a sense that it's plateauing here, but at least it's a lot better than it was. It's, what is that, almost 5 times better than it was. Things are looking much better in San Diego, but it's no time to relax because it's still at 400, which is quite bad. San Mateo, look at some of the Bay Area counties. I know that some of my listeners are in the Bay Area. We'll look at San Francisco Bay Area. Santa Cruz, we've already looked at San Francisco. Obviously, these are all much better than they were, and they're dropping. Well, actually, let's look at Los Angeles, just saying, because Los Angeles was very, very bad. Missing my superlatives. I'll just give the numbers. Los Angeles was 1,600. And remember, 200 is a hot spot. Los Angeles was 1,600. Now it's about 500, way above well into hotspot territory, but dropping quickly. So this is what we see across California. Everybody's hot, mostly. There we saw a few counties that weren't, that have actually recovered out of hotspot territory. We haven't been able to say that for a while, but Los Angeles still has a pretty significant slog ahead of it in order to get down below 200, 150, all the things that we need to really be safer. So Los Angeles is getting better. Monterey, also in the Bay Area, sort of was 1,800. Now it's down to 200. Monterey's looking very good right now in daily cases per million. Alameda, same. The Bay Area is just looking good. I'm going to head out there into San Diego. Did I do San Diego? I forget. Yeah, I think I did already. It was almost 2,000. Now it's almost 500. So the big picture. Here are all the counties. Oh, I've been looking at severity the whole time. I thought I was looking at daily cases per million. Nevertheless, those two are related. The severity of all these counties is dropping and dropping and dropping. And yeah, actually, I'm gonna head over to daily cases per million, because that's the direct measure of how dangerous it is somewhere. So everything I just said was about severity, which is meaningful and a useful metric, but it doesn't give that the answer of when you're dropping, when your cases are dropping, severity goes down. So severity will actually be better than daily cases per million in many of these cases, many of these counties. All right, I'm not going to spend too much more time there. That was just a long tour through severity land, but still, San Diego was very bad. It's better. And generally, there's still more of a snarl here. It's hard to really say without looking at particular counties. But Santa Cruz, which was 800, down to below 400. This is actually a point where, well, no, actually it's above 400 again. It's a little bit unclear, but it's down to about 400. Santa Cruz getting better. Let's see what we see for Monterey again, some of these other ones. Monterey also very much down, but not looking as good as it did in severity. A lot of counties here. Let's look at Los Angeles. Los Angeles, yeah, it doesn't look as good in daily cases per million as it did in severity, because severity is taking into account that Los Angeles is plummeting in cases, but also trying to take into account that Los Angeles has a lot of cases, and you put them together, you get this kind of mixed number that's like, things are pretty good in Los Angeles because it's dropping so quickly, but that doesn't mean it's safe to go outside. Well, maybe outside by yourself, sure. 800. 200 is a hot spot. San Mateo we talked about. San Mateo's looking okay. It's and to correct what I said before then, almost nobody is actually a warm spot. Whatever I had for 80, that's not happening. We still have almost all counties are hot spots still. Some of them, like Marin, just barely. And they've got this very strong trajectory downward, which pulls the severity below 200. But in terms of how safe it actually is to be in a particular county, we still have a range, but all counties are hot. If you want to look at your particular county, remember you can do it yourself at gregfarrar.us, and you can find out how safe is my county. Again, anything over 200 is a danger spot, and you should be afraid to be hanging out with people, and you should be afraid to take off your mask. And it is that fear that will get us out of this. Let's look at the growth rates. Here again, there's something crazy going on here. Yeah, there's one county. I just want to throw this one out because it's probably small enough that it's doing that thing that I have tried to strip out the smallest counties. But anyway, let's look at the growth rate. So this is a good graph. These almost every county here has everything we want to see in a growth graph. It has negative growth. It's below the white line, which is 0. All the counties, with one exception, maybe. Yeah, pretty much. There are a couple that are very close to 0, but only Kings is actually growing right now in the short term. This one looks like Tuolumne, always kind of an outlier, does seem to be rising rapidly. So this doesn't have everything we want to see in a growth graph, but almost everything else has negative growth and falling. The growth rates are falling. If we zoom in here, we can see the growth rates here, up the 0 lines all the way at the top. So every one of these counties, which is nearly every single county, is shrinking. Shasta is crazy at 60, Imperial dropping very quickly at 50%. But it's just everyone. I can zoom in on particular counties, but with the exceptions, the bad ones are the exceptions. Yuba is shrinking quickly, but it's also heading back upwards. But the rest of these, they're shrinking. I mean, we can look at some but they're all going to look the same. It's just kind of a question of where they are. San Francisco looking great at 30% shrinkage every week, dropping 30% fewer cases every week than the week before. Santa Cruz, same, dropping 30% of its cases every week. We'll look at, what was I looking for? No, I can't even remember. Yeah, it was San Diego. San Diego, it doesn't have everything we could dream of, but at 25% drop, if it can stay here, it will be great. It will quickly get over its very high number of cases. However, it is, at least for the short term, plateauing or heading upwards, so not quite as good as some of them. San Mateo is looking great, shooting downwards, currently dropping 17% a week. Santa Clara, it's just, this is all good news. Los Angeles, we really just can't ask for better than this for most of what we're seeing in the counties of California. When a region has a negative 30% growth rate, that's about as good as the growth rates ever get. And when it's showing no sign of losing that momentum, that's just, I'm so happy. We're going to see very quickly, judging from this, we're going to see cases just drop and drop and drop and drop. Not Now, if you start at 1,000, though, which many of these are, that does mean in a week you're at 700, 30% drop, which is still bad. In a week later, you're at, 550 or something, 500, I don't know. A week later, you're at 350, something, my mental math. But so that means that even 3 weeks from now, even with these really nice graphs, we still are hotspots. And then it goes and goes for 3 more weeks, and maybe finally you've dropped out of hotspot territory. So it's weeks and weeks still that we have to be careful before we can start maybe to be a little less careful, because these counties are just so hot in the number of cases they have. But the trend finally is looking very good. Let's just look at Santa Cruz. I already did look at Santa Cruz. I want to look at Monterey. I'm just going to do Monterey alone. Same, 35% drop. Yeah, there's not much news here because everyone has the same news. Every county in California is shrinking. Every county is dropping with a few exceptions. So the news is very good in California, but it will take, given how bad the news was for so long, it's going to take a month probably before, even if the news stays this good, it's going to take, assuming that they all sort of level out at 30%. I mean, if these keep heading downward to 50 or 60 or 70%, we could pull out of this a lot faster, and maybe that'll happen. But we haven't seen that before, and so I'm more expecting them to level off at 30%. And that means it's a long slog still, a month, 2 months, before we finally see things to the point where we can start to relax our behaviors. So keep doing what you're doing. Whatever you're doing is working. I think what you're doing, probably, California, is you're staying away from indoor gatherings. You're wearing your masks. You're getting vaccinated. All those things will help us to keep this very good progress we're seeing. So that's the news. Just good news across the board, pretty much. Good news in terms of the trends. This is my COVID-19 trends live stream, after all, and the trends are great. That said, the present is bad everywhere in the United States and in California, especially. The daily cases are very high. There's still a real danger of transmission, and so keep vigilant, stay vigilant. We still need to be on the eastern slope fear. Stay on slope fear. That's how we got here, is by being afraid. That's how we stay here. That's the news. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for watching.